Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining us today at Crunch 3.4. Just bear with me one moment. There we go. Hi. So thank you very much for joining us today. We did just want to, of course, set up another one of our Crunch sessions, and we have a few more coming up for the rest of this year. But thank you so much for joining us today for the session. This one is 3.4, Mapping the Cultural Change, an event series that Crunch continues to be supported by our TAB partners at Google and Xandr. So this is the first of our 3 interconnected Crunch series events. It will be followed by 3.5, the cultural change, brand safety and positive selection of content, which will be taking place next Wednesday the 2nd. And then shortly afterwards, the following Wednesday, will be taking place 3.6, KPIs for the ethical ad economy, and that will be on the 9th. So please do join us for those as well. So the topic for today's discussion really doesn't need an introduction. As we continue to navigate our way through a global pandemic, we have all seen a pivotal shift in wider societal issues and movements. From Black Lives Matter to climate change and sustainability, all of the movements we already knew to be important have had our focus towards them enhanced. As well as affecting our personal lives, the cultural change is impacting the way that our industry works, affecting brands, agencies, and the publishers they choose to work with. Today, we will explore what this means for our industry, understanding these new behaviours and trends and what the drivers are behind them. We have an excellent lineup for you today from a variety of speakers, all from whom bring their own experiences and perspective to the discussion, including Dr. Sean O'Ferguson, Ali Hanan, Will Kirkpatrick, Femi Taiwo, Anisha Doshi, Deborah Roseneck and Harriet Kingerby. A huge thank you to you all for joining us today. To kick off this session, first and foremost, I'll hand over to Dr. Sean Ferguson, who's Associate Dean at Asia School of Business.
Thank you very much, Jenna. I can't release my video, so I think one of you guys have to do it. But thank you very much for the opportunity to share here. I'm really excited to be here to talk about mapping the cultural change and talking about what's going on in the world as it relates to things like conscious capitalism. What does it mean for leaders of tomorrow? One of the things that we're seeing in this profession, as Associate Dean, I've been in this at the Asia School of Business. We're a partnership with MIT Sloan School of Management, and I've been working at MBA programs for the last 15 years. And I would say I've definitely seen an evolution of students over time and what their expectations are for the future. So we're okay, got the video going. And so, one of the things that has happened, if you think about the different generations, this has kind of fueled their view as far as what their expectations are of coming to an MBA program. One of the things that has always kind of motivated me in this profession and where I found a sense of purpose is that I felt like MBA programs were leadership factories, and I think we all can agree that the world needs more leaders. And I think what's happened over the last 15 years since I've been in the profession, students have changed specifically, right? And so, a lot of the students when I got in, they were Gen Xers, maybe Gen Yers. And then, Gen Xers were, at that point in time, were really influenced by joining, a company, basically getting a good job and kind of fitting into the machine, right? And then, for a lot of individuals who were victims of, say, the tech bust, Enron, WorldCom, there was an economic fallout that lasted for, a significant period of time in the early 2000s. And then what you have is this kind of next generation, Gen Y, as they're coming on board for business schools, the things that, maybe a Gen X person had seen, like someone my age, my parents, they they worked for Ford for, 25 years and 30 years and retired in their mid 50s. There were no longer these, guaranteed covenants to the same degree. Like, you put in your time, you get this out. It became less with Generation Y, less with Gen Z. And to the point with Gen Z, they don't even know that, your parents worked for 30 years and they get some kind of retirement package and they can ride off into the sunset. All they've seen are things like the financial crisis, COVID, et cetera. And so their view of what they're looking for is materially different, right? And so, and I think, people give them a rough time because, it seems like they're idealistic, but if you look at how they're viewing, their careers and what's next, they're really looking for a sense of purpose, right? And the irony of this, as it relates to kind of conscious capitalism, is one of like the fundamental elements of conscious capitalism is kind of purpose and having, a values-based view on things as an organization. And so while sometimes I think people poo-poo this generation, right? I think they're moving at a far more advanced pace than prior generations as far as thinking about how they fit into the world. And so when I talk to my students, I'm responsible for careers and admissions and everything, and I go through the whole life cycle of the MBA program. These guys are thinking about things from a very values and purpose-driven perspective. When they're talking about companies, they want to know what the companies are doing. Are they thinking about the benefits of society and the planet? They're thinking about the triple bottom line. And I think they have this view that endless GDP growth is not kind of the answer for all of society. And so they're looking for more holistic solutions, right? And so I think they really are gravitating to the companies that kind of embody, that embrace and embody, conscious capitalism, right? And when you think of the companies that are, the kind of conscious capitalist companies, they really have, 4 particular elements to their being and their approach, right? They're focused on, they have a purpose. They're a purpose-driven organization, right? Then they're also culture, have a strong conscious culture. And then that conscious culture is driven by a conscious level of leadership who's kind of enabling that culture in the organization. And then they have a very broad and holistic view for the stakeholders that they're serving, right? So, in the past, for the 18th and 19th, for the 19th and 20th century, profit was the way you measured success, right? But that is a very kind of unsophisticated kind of measure of how you are as an organization. And with these kind of companies that are really embracing the elements of conscious capitalism, they're thinking about the whole stakeholder community. They're thinking about, are we doing the right things ecologically, societally, et cetera. And so, the students have really moved in this particular direction when they're thinking about where they want to work. And the kind of career conversations that I hear my students say is, I want to work in, I have a student, he said to me, I want to work in, sustainable food production. And when I talked about options, well, I'm like, that's a very niche industry, right? And what about like, a Procter and Gamble or a Unilever or something like that do some of those same kind of consumer products like things. And their response to me is that I'm not sure how committed to sustainability and things of that nature. And so these guys, they also do their homework to a very great degree. Overall, I think their view is that capitalism is kind of obsolete and dysfunctional, right? And that they're seeing it right now. And so in the media, one of the things that you see, this is particularly in the US, folks are really talking about like, baby boomers and Gen X is like, why are people interested in socialism, right? That's taboo in the US. And I'm like, well, if you look at a lot of the economic indicators, like inequality in developed economies, not the developing world, the developed economies it's at its highest level in 50 years, right? Since the pandemic has started, Jeff Bezos, his wealth has grown $71 billion, right? That's not what it is. It's grown by that much. In the United States, you're having food lines and shortages in Texas. And I think sometimes, what people see is they see the hypocrisy of like this dynamic about socialism and free markets, right? Like a lot of, if you look, people praise free markets as the solution for everything. But like people only like free markets when they work for them, right? One of the examples I talk to my kids and the students about is, if I'm not sure, this is a very American-centric example, but like in professional basketball, right? The NBA, there are 30 teams, all owned by billionaires, right? But and all these billionaires, I would say, I can't say 100% for sure, but most of them are probably free market oriented businessmen, right? But when they get to the NBA, they've instituted these kind of socialized systems like a salary cap, wage limits, things of that nature to protect the interests of everyone, right? So it's like, on one hand, when the market favors you or the conditions favor you, you're for free markets, right? And then on the other hand, when it doesn't favor you, when you're the Memphis Grizzlies and you have to compete against the Los Angeles Lakers, you want a level playing field, right? You don't want the free market to distort things, right? And so, and I think our students see, this is just one example, but students see like these kind of inconsistencies in a lot of the dialogue about free markets and things of that nature. And then, if you go in the academic domain, we had a conference the other day. Esther Duflo, the Nobel laureate from 2019 in economics, people talk about the free markets being the solution to everything and being more efficient at solving problems. And that's the solution. And that's always been the kind of mantra in America. But one of the points she makes about like free markets is that free markets picks the problems that are easiest to solve, right, and that have the highest economic upside, right? So maybe the market doesn't see the value in solving something like world hunger or curing cancer in the same way, and it leaves problems like that for governments, right? And so if you leave the worst problems for government, of course it's going to be more inefficient than the market. And so I'm not here to critique markets or to praise governments, but what I'm saying is what the solutions that are needed going forward are more nuanced. And I think this generation is expecting corporations and organizations to be a little bit more grown up and a little bit more eloquent about the solutions that society needs. And that's trickling down into, as you guys as advertisers, you're going to have nuanced and more eloquent messaging and ways of engaging with them in order to, bring them to your channels of distribution. And so those are a few remarks that, I wanted to kick off some things. I have a lot more to say, but I'll turn it back over to Harriet.
Hi, Sean. I unfortunately can't turn on my video. There we go. Thanks, Sean. We had a lot in there around generational differences and attitudes towards capitalism, around kind of this tension between capitalism and socialism. This is fascinating. So next up, I would like to hand over to Ali Hanan from Creative Equals, who's going to talk to us.
Brilliant. Can you hear me all and see me? Hey, good morning, everybody. It's an absolute honor and a pleasure to be involved in this discussion today. I think it's just such an important discussion to be having right now. So my name is Ali Hanan. I'm the founder and chief exec of Creative Equals, and we're an organization driving equity, inclusion, and diversity. Note I've said it in that order across the creative industry sector. And we believe, of course, that this is a core driver for culture change and also a core driver for innovation, for creativity, for productivity, and ultimately for profitability. And I guess, our ethos is actually having diverse teams at the table. So having all sorts of different types of perspectives creates diverse and inclusive products. So whether that's advertising or copy or editorial content or digital tools, we have to make sure that we have those teams for that work to reach out to all the different types of communities and audiences that we serve. And right now, I think we've got just a massive challenge on our hands because, of course, in terms of the editorial and journalism sector in the UK, we find that 95% of journalists are white and 45% of them go to have been or had their education at a private school or a public school, as they say in the UK. So we have a very homogenous group of people writing for consumer audiences there. Equally in the advertising sector, we know that, for example, 83% of creative directors, so those people who edit, curate and arbitrate creative work, are men. And of course, only 5% of them come from a Black, Asian, multi-ethnic perspective. So the challenge that we've got is this notion of who makes the work, shapes the work. So the challenge that we've got is that a lot of bias is written into a lot of our advertising media publishing, at the moment, which, has a huge and profound impact on culture. We've actually just done an inclusive editorial audit with one publisher, and what we've found actually is also editors really drive bias throughout their content, and of course that has an impact on the communities that they write for and serve. And I guess it's how you think of the whole ecosystem and how that kind of manifests and goes out into society. You can see that the impact of having inclusive editorial can be quite profound in the way that we reach different communities, the way that we talk to emerging audiences, and obviously ultimately appeal to advertisers as well. It's interesting to note that just yesterday Diageo came out with their 2030 plans. Their aim is to have 50% women in leadership by the year 2030. And 45% Black, Asian, multi-ethnic diversity within their leadership teams as well. So, great to see some brands, really putting this on the agenda. But I think, what we've found this year in COVID-19 is obviously, what we saw in lockdown back in April and May is obviously everybody went, went to their homes, everyone was locked down, and suddenly all our communities got very hyper local. We were just sort of walking within our own, mini villages, and everybody was sitting there watching, obviously, social media, the news, and of course, on the 26th of May, George Floyd was brutally murdered, and the Black Lives Matter movement, which has been around for decades, reignited and swept across the globe and swept up through every business in a very profound and meaningful way. And the challenge that we've got across the advertising sector is, of course, that 97% of our CEOs are white. And I think in that moment, these CEOs had to really stop and listen to the lived experiences of Black talent within their communities and listen to the raw emotion that came through at the time of George Floyd's murder. And I think organizations had to really stop and reflect on themselves and figure out whether they're just going to be against racism or actively anti-racist. And what we've seen in the diversity and inclusion space is just a huge seismic shift in interest and in change. So, it was interesting back in March, diversity and inclusion budgets were the first ones to be pulled. And actually what we've seen is that they've come online in a way that I have never seen before in all of the 5 years I've worked in this space. And I think to your point, Dr. Sean, it's really interesting looking at the generation coming through, because 74% of young grads want to go and work for a company that has an inclusion policy that puts diversity and inclusion right at the heart of their company, because we know that there are 4 key drivers to inclusion within companies, which are like mini cultures within obviously society and organizations, but there are 4 drivers. And I love what you were saying before about purpose and values. The number one thing for people within companies is to have a sense of psychological safety. And I think what we've seen and heard of a lot throughout the Black Lives Matter movement throughout businesses is the microaggressions, the everyday bias, the covering and code switching, the lived experiences on the shop floor that people have had to go through. So just that sense of like people have to turn up to work and feel that they are safe and that they have a work-life balance and that their well-being is looked after. The second thing is people have to feel connected. they have to feel like they're part of the culture of a company. And obviously, if a culture is, is quite homogenous in one way or another way, it can be quite difficult to feel part of that culture. So, driving a culture of inclusion, driving connection across businesses, driving an understanding of different people and different cultures is absolutely key to driving connection. The third thing is, have I got a future at this company? Have I got a future in the culture of this company? Can I succeed? Are there role models around that look and sound like me? So lack of career progression is the number one reason why people leave companies. And of course, being able to see a future at the company is key to being able to stay. And, there's lots of things that we know around bias within companies that mean often different groups within companies don't get the same equal access to opportunity. And of course, the fourth thing is everything that you've spoken to is being aligned to the purpose and values of a company. And I think given everything that's gone on this year in the pandemic, people have had to stop and, I think there's been a lot of existential angst in the system. People have woken up in the morning going, well, what do I stand for? What do I advocate for? Who am I in this story? If anything happened to me or my family tomorrow, what do I want to be remembered for? And I think that kind of emotional shift this year has meant that people more than ever have to feel that they are waking up in the morning and going to work at a company where they feel that they are aligned to those values and that purpose. So yeah, number one thing is psychological safety. Number two thing is feeling connected to the company. Number three thing is knowing that I've got a future at this company and in this culture. And the number four thing is just being really aligned to the purpose and the values and the goals of this company. So yeah, that's it from me. And I think, and I think in 2021, we're going to continue to see that profound shift. And I think, we're really seeing a radical transformation in diversity programs within companies. I don't think we can change soon enough or fast enough. And it's really has to be action-based. So that's it from me. Back to you, Harriet.
Thank you, Ali. And it's really interesting to see the common themes in between what Sean was talking about with purpose and values being at the core of this new movement, and the generational differences as well that are creating the need and the demand. Thank you, Ali. So next up, I would like to introduce Will Kirkpatrick, who's Head of Sustainability Operations at O2.
Unmute. There we go. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here to talk about the what it means for a business like O2, a very commercial business. If I go back to the beginning of our story, O2 was founded on the 2nd of February 2002. O2, O2, O2. And it was founded with this insight that mobile was essential for life. And we've always had this view that doing good is good for business. But I guess what I would say is that that's never been more true than it is today. Last year, Mark Carney said, a business without a sustainability plan doesn't have a plan. And so why is that? Well, we've seen this explosion of societal and environmental issues that Ali and Sean touched on. Climate crisis, Black Lives Matter, and COVID. But, what we're seeing really around that is this growth in consumer interest. So we've got massive consumer activism, but it's not just the Generation Z and the Generation Greta. It's very much going mainstream. For us, we also have a big business-to-business side of our operation. And what we're seeing is that big business customers are putting increasing weighting on our societal and environmental credentials in bids and tenders. So these are for huge value contracts. And so we need to up our game to win those businesses. We've also got a range of other stakeholders where this is becoming even more important as well. So investors, we've seen this massive growth in ESG investing, environment, society, and governance. So investment in those funds are predicted to double this year. And of course, you know, it's under the spotlight for press. So from a reputational point of view, it's massively important. And for policymakers, another key group of stakeholders for us. So we've got COP26 being hosted in Glasgow next year. So, you know, there is the possibility for businesses of future taxation and regulation. So it's massively important that we're engaged. I guess, you know, what I'm trying to say with this is that there are big commercial requirements to get involved as much as there is the moral requirement for business. And I think that's really what is making a real difference in terms of building that traction across the business community. So at O2, we've had a long history of doing activity around environment and society. There's a lot of activity that I'm pleased to say that goes on behind the scenes. So we've been purchasing renewable electricity to power our network, where we control the bill since 2015. And we've set a target to be net zero by 2025 for the total operation. So that includes network sites that we don't own and manage. We were one of 3 companies to get the highest certification from the Carbon Trust for the work we do to reduce carbon in our supply chain. So we're very much going beyond our core business and trying to use our scale to influence our suppliers as well. And we've got customer propositions like O2 Recycle. In other areas, we partnered with the NSPCC recently to help keep kids safe online. And we also have a bold diversity and inclusion agenda within O2 as well. You know, this is championed by our CEO, which is massively helpful. And for anybody who wants to do more in their business, you know, getting buy-in from your CEO and the top management is absolutely vital to drive momentum. I guess, you know, and I think that the fact is, you know, we're seeing so many more companies, you know, joining this race to net zero and really taking this stuff super seriously. So I think this is going to be a big trend that will only grow across the business community. I guess one challenge for me, really, if you are somebody who wants to do more purpose and sustainability marketing, is this received wisdom that this activity doesn't drive commercial outcomes. It doesn't drive sales. I think, you know, often we're informed by you know, what customers say they want in consumer qualitative groups or in quantitative surveys. And in our experience, at least, often they choose things like value and price over what we do for people and planet. But in practice, what we've seen is when you put emotional campaigns into the marketplace, they really perform well and outperform other activities. So a campaign that we did with O2 and NSPCC last year, it had the highest engagement of any campaign in digital, not just any campaign from O2, but any campaign that our media agency Havas had ever seen in terms of view-through rates. And we also measure our activity in econometrics as well, so that we can see the direct linkage between the pounds spent on the media and the return on investment in terms of revenue and profitability. And that activity had the highest return on investment in terms of profitability than any other brand campaign that we ran. So I guess I'm really trying to give this commercial lens. I agree with everything that Sean and Ali said about, you know, the desire from people coming into industry and the requirement more broadly to, you know, become more responsible businesses. And, you know, it has to be about doing the right thing. But at the same time, you know, the real opportunity is to find the point where the moral case meets the business case. And, you know, when we do activity to measure it, to really work hard to demonstrate that it's delivering a really strong return on investment, because that's going to be better for everybody in the long run. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Will. And it's great to hear that this kind of conscious decision making actually drives business. And interesting again to hear about it's not just the kind of the employees and the younger generation that are coming through, but also there are drivers from investors. It sounds like you've got the support of your CEO, which is absolutely fantastic. Okay, so next up, I would like to introduce Femi Taiwo, who's Data and Technology Strategy Director at OMD EMEA.
Hi, good morning all. Hope you can hear me. Yes, thanks for the introduction, Harriet. I think from a media and an agency perspective, there's probably two pillars, I suppose, that I can speak from. One, I'll start with the data and tech side of things. Being with an agency looking after data and technology, there are a lot of things that I have to think about in terms of sort of sustainability and the kind of questions that our clients ask us, which are not limited to how our total infrastructure, whether it's programmatic or ad serving, is impacting our total carbon footprint, as it were. So, we know that 88% of consumers believe that, brands should be paying more attention to reducing pollution, and they're expecting their businesses and their brands to take responsibility for doing so. We know that we have clients that are in the airline industry or in the travel industry, and so they have those core and peripheral concerns. But we also know that when it comes to the tools that we use for our everyday job, for example, the internet accounts for roughly 3.5–4% of global greenhouse emissions. And if you think about it, that's almost the same as the airline industry. So when we talk about data centers and we talk about Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud, which are tools that we use as part of our, especially our automation and some of our more sophisticated projects, data warehouses and data centers consume around 2% of global electricity. So, and that's growing year on year as we become more connected, as we do more sophisticated things. So from our perspective, from a data and tech perspective, there is a very strong impetus to be able to justify the footprint that we have as a whole, as an agency, and work not just within ourselves to make sure that we're doing the right things, but also to work with other agencies and have a truly industry collaborative effort to make sure that we are driving sustainability. It will help us when it comes to new business. So there is that there is the market forces angle to it, or to quote Dr. Sean at the very beginning, there is the idea of letting the free markets do that work, but then there's also the sustainability for our clients. We know that some of our clients are on some very aggressive changes and some very aggressive turnarounds. Some of them, for example, Levi's is one of the clients I work on. They have a very big sustainability push, with waterless jeans and with making sure they use less dye in their jeans, things that are beneficial for the environment. And it's a very strong focus for them over the next 5–10 years. So we have to make sure that we live those brands as well. Now, that's the data and tech angle. From the other side of the coin comes the diversity of media execution, if you will, from the planning to the buy-in and obviously to make sure the media is activated. And I'm sure by now most of us have probably seen the Sainsbury's and the Tesco ads, which highlights a very interesting issue in the backdrop and the context of sort of Black Lives Matter, in terms of diversity, in terms of inclusion. When the Tesco ad first aired, I saw the comments online. We had a little discussion internally around it. We've got within our agency, we have employment resource groups that are designed around the expected pillars. So, around race, around disabilities, around gender. We've got about 8 pillars or thereabouts. And so I thought the Tesco one was a one-off, basically. But then seeing a similar reaction in Sainsbury's, in the Sainsbury's ad, it kind of makes you realize two things. One is that for many brands to put their purpose out there and to align the advertising to their purpose, there needs to be a willingness to sacrifice in the long term, right? And by that I mean, if people make good on their threats and you genuinely have a mass exodus, I don't think it would happen, but a mass exodus from people using your shopping or using your brand or engaging with your brand or buying your products fundamentally, is, you know, we haven't had the question answered yet, but it would be a question of, will you renege on your promise and on your purpose? And I think that's probably something that as an industry we need to reckon with, and as a collection of, I don't know, brands, agencies, publishers, and to think about, if you stand by your values and it negatively impacts your bottom line in the short term, can you continue to stay by those values? You know, how long are you willing to tough it out? Which I think is a question that we probably won't know the answer to for another year or so. But we should probably keep an eye on the share prices of Sainsbury's and Tesco's. And I think that, you know, from an agency perspective, I was happy to see that such quote unquote controversy come off the back of that. I thought that it was good. Good PR, if you will, for the brands, for Tesco's and for Sainsbury's. But I also thought it helped to highlight an issue that we probably haven't been given much attention to in the wider public context, because frankly, we all live in an advertising bubble. We have a very odd opinion of the world that isn't probably reflected widely. So to that end, from our perspective as an agency, we are making sure that we're trying to bring in more people through the ranks. And so by that, we've taken initiatives like making sure that any external recruitment agency that we have to use has to submit a certain amount of CVs that are diverse for us to consider them. So, for example, a role opens. I work within the market intelligence team. I'm proud, I guess, to say that it's probably the most diverse team in our entire agency. There's about 40 people on the team, and there's probably about 15 nationalities, you know, within that team itself. But if we have a role open for a data engineer, for example, we will not consider an external agency until they can produce 5 CVs of varying backgrounds. And so that can be split by race lines, by gender, you know, by all manner of things. But in short, we make sure that we have a fully diverse talent pool to then source from. And then we also do all the necessary things. So we redact all the information from the agency, from the recruitment agency. So we don't know whose people's names are. We ask them skills-based questions beforehand, and we try and treat everything, and it's a very market intelligence thing to do, but we treat everything as a data point. And so we therefore use that to then to screen the applicants. And then it's not until you get to a telephone or face-to-face that we actually know who you are and what you are. You're just candidate 1 or candidate 2, as it were. And so those kind of things we're trying to use to be able to help us increase the level of diversity within the agency and increase the amount of ideas that come in, because we've seen some, within our team, we've seen some amazing innovation, especially within this 9 months of this year. You know, since we've gone into lockdown and this year that's been COVID, we've seen some amazing innovation come out of people's creativity and sort of people's experiences of life as a whole. And for us, it's very important, especially being an EMEA focused agency, to be able to represent the necessary people within EMEA, first and foremost, and also the breadth of our clients across different countries, you know, different cultures, and with tailored plans across those different markets appropriately. So if I was going to sort of sum it up, I suppose in one sentence, from an agency perspective, we're looking very much at how we become more sustainable from a technology perspective, and working with with the partners that you will work with as well to get that and make that a reality, and then also making sure that we bring in the talent and help them and nurture and help grow them within the agency so that they can then influence the ideas when it comes to the top and the leadership. Back to you, Harriet.
Thank you, Femi. And it's great to hear that real data-driven approach to this and to actually kind of changing the business processes. And really interesting to hear as well that it's not always easy to live your values and easy to engage with this conscious capitalist approach. Thank you so much. Next up, I'd like to introduce Anisha Doshi, who's Comms Planning Manager at Carat. and also co-chair of Represent Dentsu's Ethnic Diversity Network.
Thank you, Harriet, and thanks everyone. That's been a really great discussion so far. At Dentsu, we're still in really early stages of our D&I journey. And what's been happening so far is that clients will ask a really broad question like, how can we improve D&I? And it's such a huge question. There's so many things to consider. And they're leaning on us to really be the experts. And this gives us the opportunity as media agencies and as other agencies and publishers within Adland to really shape and take the lead with marketing and advertising and help drive positive change in the work that we produce for clients. And we may not necessarily be the experts, but we need to learn, and we just need to better ourselves and become the experts, essentially. So what's quite interesting and what happens as a result of this question being asked is that we have to start pointing out our own flaws in our planning in order to provide solutions and understand the improvements that need to be made. And the problems that need to be solved. So it does involve like a degree of humility and honesty. And I think, clients have appreciated that, because a lot of the time there's a kind of common understanding that we haven't really looked at purposefulness of marketing in this way before. Well, some clients have, and some marketing teams have, but other ones haven't. So it's asking like quite, frank questions. So are there certain like groups we've been excluding or alienating because of our targeting messaging strategies? Do we need to reevaluate the publishers or content that we're ultimately funding and associating ourselves with? And then, as Ali and Femi mentioned, how diverse and inclusive are our teams, or how diverse and inclusive are the client teams, and how is this reflected in the work that we're doing? So clients often have really great intentions, and it's often about like guiding them to asking the right questions and being brave in the solutions being proposed. So this kind of then leads into like, what are the actions and structures being put into place? So going back to, my point about how improving D&I is such a huge movement, and this is because everything's so interlinked. So it's important to understand what's happening internally in our organization and in the organizations of who we work with and who we partner with, because it's about driving, long-term sustainable positive change within society. So in Dentsu, we do have our wider D&I committee that's been formed with key D&I strategies for each diversity pillar or network. So we've got LGBTQ+, gender, well-being, ethnic diversity, and I sit on Represent, which is the Ethnic Diversity Network, and we have 3 strategic pillars, so talent, culture, and work. So it's a really 360 approach. Where essentially evaluating how inclusive and diverse our organisation is and what practices we can put in place. Otherwise, you get these kind of situations with like previously with L'Oreal and Monroe Bergdorf, who was the Black trans model who was fired a few years ago for calling out white violence against Black people, but then she got fired by L'Oreal, and then when PLM kicked off this year, L'Oreal posted a black square on social media to show their support for Black Lives Matter, and, which was condemned as being quite hypocritical. So L'Oreal clearly they wanted to do something externally, but they hadn't really fixed what was going on internally within their organization. And this ultimately had a positive outcome in the end, because Monroe Bergdorf ended up joining L'Oreal's D&I board, but it went into like flames initially. So I think it's really important that clients and organizations within Adland are always asking themselves, what is the actual change that we're trying to drive, and what is the purpose behind what we're doing? It can't just be something that's external and for publicity, or one social media post. It has to be real, tangible things and driving change on a 360 level. So a lot of what we're trying to be doing, is ensuring that behind the scenes we have enough diverse voices at all levels, and that we're building a strong culture of inclusivity. And this, will all ultimately lead to an increase in profitability and business outcome, as countless studies and McKinsey research has proven. But when it comes to our marketing, from a work and marketing point of view, we are starting to create pragmatic and tangible strategies to put into place, with key principles to guide us. So kind of like a bottom-up approach. So first, we're reevaluating our block list. So Vice this year kind of called upon agencies to stop using antiquated practices where words like, gay and Muslim and Black were on block lists. And this is kind of a legacy issue where in the past it was used to avoid hate speech. But now, there's a lot of good and safe content out there and inclusive, positive content out there that we're missing out on, and we need to really address this problem. Secondly, we're looking at like reviewing all our suppliers and challenging them. We want to challenge them on their commitments to inclusivity, and how this kind of might factor into our planning and our decision making, and help us evaluate who we want to work with. Third, with creative work, we do want to source diverse talent, test creatives with different audience groups, and do more auditing of historic campaigns. And again, like coming back to my honesty point, so if they're historically certain campaigns haven't been great within the areas of diversity inclusion, we do need to call that out, and we need to like say, yes, you know what, we can do better in the future. So that kind of involves working with external consultants and experts. So it doesn't have to just be something that we're trying to tackle ourselves. There are people and companies out there who can really help with that, and who know about how to improve advertising in this way. It's really important to get them different points of view, especially as Ali mentioned, like a lot of teams tend to be one type of homogenous person, a homogenous group. So finally, if we want to dig a bit deeper and go, do this really properly and really commit to it, it's basically putting D&I at the heart of the brief for the clients. So that's really there from the beginning. And this is what our kind of long-term ambition is. It's where we're working, with a creative agency and client to come up with ideas and solutions that are actively creating certain messages, and trying to find out where our products fit in. And I think it becomes really powerful when your message is overt to the consumer. So if you're a makeup brand, is your strategy, I don't know, I mentioned makeup brands like twice now. I don't work on a makeup brand, but it's just, I think, the easy example to go for. But if you are a makeup brand, is the strategy going to be about, for example, breaking typical gender binaries and how every skin tone is beautiful? Like, why has Fenty Beauty been so successful, and what does the brand stand for? And this comes to my point earlier about working from the inside out. And if publishers can help with this, it's even better. So yeah, it's just about, as we mentioned, like lining up the tensions of kind of changing your brand or aligning with a certain message and potentially losing customers, but what is the right thing to do? And ultimately, I don't believe that doing the right thing necessarily and capitalism have to be mutually exclusive. It is difficult, definitely, to align that, to be profitable and still do the right things. I don't think it's always that easy. And I think maybe that's an indication of what needs to change. But I do think it is achievable, and like this all kind of steps in the right direction really help. Okay, thanks. I'll hand it back to Harriet now.
Thank you so much. And it's brilliant to hear about how you're using your influence to, for example, influence clients, influence suppliers, and create this kind of systemic change. And I really, it really stuck with me that you were, that you were thinking just so holistically and making it part of everybody's job. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much, Anisha. I'd like to hand over now to Deborah Roseneck, Chief Client Officer at ESI Media.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. I'm here today to talk about how the Evening Standard's approach to purpose beyond profit has worked, and really to talk about some of the benefits we've seen, to the business as a result of that approach. Since the standard was launched back in 1827, I think it would be fair to say that our journalists and the Evening Standard as a brand have very kind of, reflected and evolved the kind of the multicultural and diverse kind of communities across London and reported on that. We do have a unique position in the hearts and minds of Londoners. And I think contributing to positive impact in London has always been at the very core of our purpose. And sometimes people ask us, well, what marks the Standard out as different? Well, one reason that we are seen as different, I think, is because of our award-winning campaigns. And they've become synonymous with our values, our ethos, and our vision as a news brand. So I just wanted to share some slides with you which detail some of these campaigns that I'm going to talk about today. So hopefully you will be able to see this. So this year, we were the first brand to respond to the pandemic, and we launched our campaign, Food for London Now, which focused on vulnerable Londoners who were really going to struggle as a result of the pandemic. Over the last 8 months, we've supplied through our partner, the Felix Project, 14 million meals to school children, to families, to the homeless, to women living in domestic violence shelters and shielded elderly people. We've raised millions of pounds in funding from businesses and our readers and have helped hopefully to reduce food poverty in London, whilst also tackling food waste at the same time. This noticeable conscious shift in our campaigns really took off back in 2010. And I'm sure you'll all remember when we launched the Dispossessed campaign to support various communities across the city. As well as shining a light on issues affecting Londoners, we raised record-breaking sums to help grassroots charities tackle poverty, inequality and social exclusion across the capital. Our vision was always to connect the haves with the have-nots and our readers with people who are less fortunate. You know, the people who have been left behind, the excluded, the dispossessed and the marginalised. We've attempted to put in place mechanisms that would make their lives better for today and more importantly, you know, in the future. Our campaigns typically start with an investigation that exposes the problem, but then develop into a situation where we try to be part of the actual solution. We take kind of like a big tent approach and we draw in help from our readers, the government, businesses and philanthropists, trying to create a value-based system across all stakeholders. One of my favourite campaigns, Get London Reading, tackled illiteracy in schools. It raised £1 million to fund 800 volunteers to go into you know, hundreds of schools across London. And we helped 3,000 children to learn to read. The flagship school that we profiled within the campaign, St Mary's in Battersea, went from being one of the worst schools in London to one of London's top 10. Our next campaign involved 60 groups across London, all working together to tackle youth violence. The mayor had been resisting creating a centralised violence reduction unit. And because of our campaign, he did a complete U-turn, and our trauma-informed approach to tackling youth violence was eventually adopted by City Hall. So over the past kind of decade, just to summarise, you know, we've raised a staggering £50 million in funding for London across our dispossessed, our literacy, our apprenticeships, our gangs, our Grenfell and homelessness campaigns. We do have a unique and trusted relationship with our readers and with London. And, you know, one of the benefits of these campaigns is that we've received widespread recognition and they've actually won awards. It's because of the learnings from these editorially led campaigns and obviously the credibility and trust that our readers place in us to take positive action that, you know, we've been able to work with brands to evolve their purpose-led marketing strategies in the capital. In 2018, we created our think tank Future London, which was a hybrid of commercial and editorial teams working together. Our aim was still very much to continue to highlight the key challenges in London, and this time though, work with commercial partners who basically shared values within those same kind of topic areas and who wanted to embed themselves in positive change within the city. We also work with government bodies, academic institutions and innovators to accelerate the pace of that change and try to make a real difference. You know, these meaningful partnerships set out to tackle issues such as the air we breathe, where we explored London's switch to cleaner transport by launching an app called Map My Street. And this enabled people across London to highlight the need for more electric charging points in their street. And we worked with our partners Source London and Uber. We launched our plastic-free pledge to lobby for change, and we worked with B Midtown, which is a business improvement district in London, to focus on their entire business community. And we helped businesses kind of adopt practices to reduce their single-use plastic usage, alongside our own internal plastic audit too. And, you know, although London is a world tech capital, you know, we all know we face a growing digital skills gap. So we worked with our partner Google, training thousands of people for free through taking a Google bus across the city and giving the people the opportunity to access free digital skills training right on their own doorstep. Most recently, we've partnered with a very well-known social media platform, and please look out for this campaign tomorrow because we are just about to launch it. But it's a much needed initiative to help the emerging talent within the struggling kind of creative communities right now. And obviously, you know, that's been a brilliant kind of campaign to work on, and we're really happy to be able to support, you know, the creative communities at a time when they need our help the most. Working in this way isn't always easy. And I think that, you know, working commercially with brands in this way, I think that they have to realize that this type of partnership can't simply be a badging exercise to further, you know, a CSR initiative. Although badging is hugely important, you know, from a compliance point of view, when we're working with editorially led campaigns, and we are absolutely very transparent with our badging so that our readers and our audiences know that we are working commercially with brands in this space. But it does require a very firm and long-term commitment from both the publisher and the brand. By focusing on the issues that matter most to London, and by working with brands in this way, who share our sustainable and ethical vision of the city, you know, we've been able to report on the challenges and become part of the solution. And I think that is probably one of the greatest benefits that we feel as a business that our approach has had. And you know, it's something that we are very, very proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. It's really, really heartening to see a publication using its reach and influence to, as you said, you know, kind of change the city and help with that visioning there. And that those brand partnerships, I've lived in London for years, and I've seen those kind of campaigns on my ways into work, and it's definitely influenced the way that I think. So thank you so much for sharing. So now I'd like to take us into a bit of discussion. You've had the speakers kind of lay out their key points for today. And it's really, I have to say, it's really heartening to hear as we founded the Conscious Advertising Network around 3 years ago to tackle issues like defunding hate speech, promoting diversity and inclusion, and ensuring children's welfare in advertising. And just to hear the breadth and the depth of what is already happening is just really heartening. So I'd just like to ask our panelists a few questions. And Sean, I'd like to come back to you first. You know, it was really interesting to hear the way that you talked about, you know, capitalism being dysfunctional, and you know, and the changes that needed to happen. What do you think of what you've heard today? You know, is capitalism starting to fix itself, or what's your reaction to what you've heard?
I think it's a mix. In some parts, I think organizations have recentered and found purpose. You know, I think they've thought about their, you know, their stakeholders and you know, kind of gain more consciousness about different elements of, you know, capitalism and like the corporate setting, the inclusiveness of it so that everyone can participate. I think, you know, they're moving in the right direction. And I think that, you know, one of the things that researchers are talking about now is that, you know, these problems are so massive that you may have to kind of decompose some of these problems into smaller problems that you can eventually cumulatively put together in order to solve some of the big problems. And so I think we're moving together. You know, being in Asia, being an American, working at American and Asian business schools, you know, I think there's more progress in some places than others, right? So if you look at, you know, like in the U.S., it's a very individualistic, hyper-capitalist kind of society, whereas, in Europe, you have these, social democracies. And then, in Asia, it's more of a collectivist society, right? So, when you think about the next evolutions of what's going on in capitalism, right? Things like, we know these as consumers, like the sharing economy, the Ubers, the Airbnbs, and things of that nature. When we think about, like, in the business context, there's this B2B kind of sharing that's going on, and it's further ahead, say, in Asia and Europe because of the social democracies and the collective environment. So I think it's piecemeal, and then some of the other things that may be happening that are just a byproduct of other things that do maybe unintended consequences or benefits, right? So, with the trade disputes between China and the United States, what you're seeing is a regionalization of supply chains, which in some ways can be better for the local communities and the local environments. And you can have more inclusiveness in a regional economy than maybe you could in a global economy. So I think there's progression on a lot of different dimensions. I think that the big piece is just the awareness, the conscientiousness. And when you look at, like, the firms that do best, right? If we think about it in the context of our lives, the people that we know who have been the most value oriented and the most purpose oriented have always done better. And it's the same things with companies. Those people who think the most holistically, who are considerate about their actions beyond themselves, they tend to do better over the long term. And so we're seeing some progression. It's not perfect yet. I think what the real issue is the willingness to wait, for a lot of the Generation Z. They want to see results, sooner rather than later, right? So.
Definitely. And if that hunger can drive us, that's fantastic. Will, I think, this really leads us nicely to you. You talked a lot as well about the return on investment from, this more conscious approach to business. Like, what else needs to happen? How can we take this further?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. We're on a journey, and I think, as I said, I think many businesses have been doing ethical and responsible activities for some time, but I think there's been a massive shift change, and we're trying to essentially move this from being seen as the classic CSR into much more at the heart of our business strategy. And I'm kind of making the commercial point really because it serves the wider societal and environmental point, because it's really about demonstrating that it's more than sustainability, it's commercial sustainability. So for me, I think it's just kind of continuing that journey to embedding the behavior change within the organization, the education, the processes, and I think it will take time, but at the end of the day, the companies that kind of lag on it will fail or lose out, and the companies that do more will do well. And I think that will become more and more apparent. And so, I mainly say for people who aren't on that journey, you've got to get on it quickly, and it's serious. And, it's a great position for people in my profession to be. I mean, I'm a marketeer by trade, really, but I've been doing what I do for the last 3 years. And any idea that it was a sort of nice little retirement project to go into the CSR department has been blown out of the water, because it's very much in the limelight and people are knocking on our door to speak to us, where it used to be the other way around. So, more commercial mindset, I suppose, in summary, more passion to do work that will change behaviors both internally and externally.
Fantastic. We've heard a lot of that passion today. Ali, obviously you've with the work with Creative Equals, the work that Creative Equals do is really kind of driving the issues of diversity and inclusion within the advertising and marketing sectors. We heard a little bit today from Anisha and Femi about what happens when organisations attempt to kind of live diversity and inclusion through their communications, and how hard that can be for them. What advice do you have for organisations who are thinking about committing to these issues in a much more meaningful way?
Yeah, I think the challenge that we often find is lots of organizations come to us and they go, oh, we want one workshop. We want to do like unconscious bias training. And we're like, no, it just doesn't work like that. Like to really unpack or redesign for inclusion, you have to literally unpack the whole organization for bias, because we see it in the promotion structures, we see it in the way that teams produce the work, we see it in the briefing process, we see it in the research that gets done. So actually, when you really design for inclusion, you have to unpack the whole system, because we talk about, you know, obviously systems change and, you know, structures of oppression, structures of inclusion. So you have to understand the structures to do that kind of deep work to get the kind of change that you need. It's not just like one little workshop, because that's never going to have the impact that you want. And it's also about co-designing with different communities within the organization. I think the challenge with having homogenous teams though is also you get collective blind spots. And, you know, we have as a sector so many blind spots. And one of them is actually for older people as well. One of the things that we talk about is like the over 50s actually holds 70% of the UK's wealth and 2/3 of the housing market. I'm 52. Now, hardly anybody talks to, you know, people who are over 50 in a way that makes them feel included in the cultural narrative. You know, equally, you know, the #1 boy's name in the UK at the moment is Muhammad, and it has been that way for the last 3 years. By the year 2050, we're going to have 15 million Muslim people from the Muslim faith living in the UK. And actually, if we're not beginning, you know, if your brand is not including, when we look at like images on websites, when we look at adverts, you know, we don't see much faith-based marketing within, you know, commercial work. So actually, you know, we have to be on the front foot for the way that the cultural fabric of every society is shifting, what's coming, you know, how are the demographics changing, and where are our blind spots in our teams that we don't see that change. So I think that is the kind of deep work to be doing. It's unpacking systemic bias, redesigning, and then actually thinking about where our collective blind spots are. And if we don't have that diversity in our team, how can we co-design and co-create with different communities to actually make authentic, real work for those communities that we want to serve? So yeah, that's my point of view.
And Anisha, I think that brings us nicely to you. How has the work that you changed and your place of work changed as a result of the work that you've done?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, we are obviously still in very early stages, but I do think there's something to be said about kind of taking a leaf out of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's notebook, but like, don't discount the small incremental changes that are happening over a long, consistent period of time. So for us, for example, like we're on like my accounts, most of that very early stages of just seeing like, okay, we've been looking at our block lists, who are the audiences we're missing out on, how is our creative currently alienating certain consumers, and how can we align ourselves with more inclusive publishers and content. And that's really like a hygiene state, at the hygiene stage. That's really like the basics of what we should have already been doing like years ago, but it's what we're just starting now. And then I think maybe the long term, and this is all about test and learn approaches. So, you know, we're going to try some things might not work so well, some things might. And, you know, I think it's important to like be a bit open and flexible to the idea that we have to try and kind of scatter loads of seeds and see what takes, and see what anything we can do to help improve anything and ultimately contribute to the wider D&I agenda, because not everything is going to be smooth sailing and perfect. And then I think that, and then obviously the long-term ambition will be having a fully more integrated like well-oiled kind of machine that actually does fulfill all the ways that we can deliver on and D&I and have strategies that are really purpose-driven and that really are influencing consumers. I think, you know, as advertisers and marketers, we have so much power. Like it's our job to influence and change the way people think, behave, act. And it's really important that we use that power responsibly. So our ultimate goal should always be about how can we do this in a positive way. And I do think maybe there's a tension in terms of what our role is and what we're trying to get out from the consumer. But I think if we're always trying to improve and do it as responsibly as possible, then I think that is a great thing to do. And so yeah, so it's, you know, it's about, we're doing small tests at the moment. just moving like the right direction. And you know, you could argue it's a bit of a snail's pace, but I do think like if you want to drive like long-term sustainable change, it's going to happen slowly, and it takes a degree of patience, but with some momentum to constantly be trying. And I think I've noticed it does often take, from my experience, it often takes like 1 or 2 people who are keen to push it forwards, because it requires effort and active like participation, and you have to like source partners to work with yourselves, or source the work to do, or find out where the gaps are. Like unless it's very easy, a lot of the time people don't want to do it, so there has to be like 1 or 2 people who are really driving that forward, and on every client team.
Wonderful. Ali, did you have your hand up there? Oh no, okay. Apologies. Fantastic. Okay, so Femi, I was really interested to hear you talk about the carbon footprint of media. Can you expand on that a little bit more? Because I know that it's a bit of a hot topic with the Ad Association releasing their kind of net zero plan this week.
There we go. Right. I think from our perspective, obviously, it is in digital anyway. It is a fundamental sort of unspoken rule that we're all consuming enormous amounts of energy to deliver advertising and to run our businesses. And kind of like it's anecdotally, I have conversations with family members where they're like, well, why have I got to subscribe for this content? Why have I got to pay for it? I'm like, well, you realize to run a website is not free, right? It's like a fundamental thing. I'm like, hosting costs something, and so there's all the people that actually write the content. They get the people who write the content part, but a lot of consumers don't understand the infrastructure part of it. In the same way in which they've never thought about utilities outside of their own, right? So and I think that from an advertising perspective, the more sophisticated we become. So from an OMD EMEA perspective, our marketing intelligence team was, I don't know, 7-10 people 2 years ago. It is now 40, right? There's a lot of people that have grown, in a short amount of time. And those people are people that have specialized skills. By that, I mean sort of data engineers and data scientists. So people that do a lot of code, right? So we have to reckon with the fact that we're using up significant portions of Amazon and Google and Microsoft services to deliver that content. And as a result of that, it is, Ad Net Zero is obviously really important for us, because 1, we want to be doing the right thing as an agency. 2, our clients are also starting to ask us those questions that Anisha mentioned, right? Around not just our D&I policies, but also around our carbon footprint, and around how we are, how we are making sure that we are offsetting these things. And it's not just from the clients you'd expect, the ones who are making those changes, but also from the ones who are in travel heavy industries. Imagine an airline client asking you, what are you guys doing? And I'm like, oh, well, so it's important for us to start joining the dots across the board and saying that here's how we are using, here's how much not so much our electricity bills cost, but here's how our office space and our energy requirements are being used up. But also with all the advertising we deliver on your behalf, here is how much the service infrastructure is being used as well. So I think it is a massive project, because as one of the big agencies, we're obviously we're a Russian doll model, so in the sense of, we roll up into OMG, which rolls up into OMC. So it's not as simple as just we're good and therefore, we're sorted out well, OMD EMEA. We have to make sure it rolls up into OMG as well. And so there is a without going into the weeds of it, there is a requirement to tie this up to all of our other security work that we do. So as part of our security audits, we'll normally ask our big tech partners to provide us with information around the data centers, the security states, and what the servers look like. That also now has to include another set of questionnaires around what the energy consumption requirements are like, and what they are doing to offset that. Because fundamentally, and we'll know obviously about this from an OT perspective, we're never going to be able to go and inspect the actual data centers ourselves to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. But we can ask them to provide us reports, which then feed back into our wider, our wider reporting back to the industry. So for us, it's very much being able to rely and trust that our tech partners are doing the right things. And if they are, then making sure that the things that we can control, so the standard stuff, switch off your lights, any water running, etc., all those kind of things, then feed back into the conversation that says to our clients, right, we're doing all these things responsibly from a carbon footprint perspective. So not just give us more money, but you have confidence that we are living out the brand values that we have put in place.
That's really great. So embodying the change that you want to see, and so that you can kind of broker those conversations. Brilliant. Deborah, just given we've heard so much about how how conscious business is changing, you've been running these campaigns for 10 years or more. How are the changes that we've heard about, these generational shifts, this this questioning of capitalism, how is that all feeding into the types of campaigns that you do? Yeah.
Sure. Well, I mean, first off, I think the Evening Standard's kind of commitment to trying to contribute to positive social and ecological and financial kind of change in the city has always been in our DNA. And, through our campaigns, I think the key thing for us, why they have been so successful and have really struck a connection with our audience and with London, is that the authenticity is at the core of all of those campaigns. So talking about kind of, the more commercial campaigns that we've launched as well through our Future London initiative, I think for us, it has been a real eye-opener over the last few years, because we've seen a marked shift in brands approaching us, wanting to work within this space with us. I think the brands that are able to communicate their purpose at a higher level by taking those kind of concrete positive actions, that authenticity comes through really strongly then. And I think that, readers and our audiences respond really positively to that because of that reason. But, like I said earlier, the process is not always, an easy and straightforward one. And it requires really, it requires real commitment on both sides. And, I think brands have to be really kind of brave to sometimes kind of move away from the short-termism into a much more kind of longer term commitment in terms of their purpose and communicating that purpose in a continual and consistent way to their consumers. I think, for us, the heart of our business strategy is being able to kind of communicate that purpose in a very open and honest and transparent way. And I think our audiences have responded, very positively to that approach over the last 10 years.
Fantastic. So just coming back to that point of authenticity as well, I'd like to open it up to the whole panel and just say, are there places where we're just not doing well enough? We've had some fantastically positive stories today, but what do we really need to push on, and what really needs to improve?
Happy to give a point of view on that. I think it's been interesting touching on the advertising industry's climate plans and some of the other views around campaigning. I noted that in the Advertising Association's plan, they talk about the power of advertisers to influence people and to drive change. And I guess what worries me, we did a lot of deep listening through social a while back, and you realize that, everything you see in the press, that we have a very polarized society. And Sean mentioned the kind of culture of individualism versus collectivism. And there is a lot of pushback, from people who don't want to get on that journey of change. And so I think that it's essential to try to deliver campaigns and think about, how you reach and persuade those audiences that are skeptics, and to try to get them on board. So I think, it's trying to find that balance between being authentic, but kind of meeting the skeptics in the middle ground to drive change.
Yeah, and for me, it's really about just continually pushing the representation agenda. I think we were all pretty horrified to see the reaction to Sainsbury's advert just recently with the dad, the daughter, and the boat of gravy. And you know, equally, just a couple of weeks before that, there was ITV's diversity dance, and the kind of like reaction that happened on social media that was just, you know, after everything that's happened this year, to see the level of racism that popped up all over Twitter in such a, you know, deplorable way. You know, I think we just have to keep on making sure that we represent until this is just, this is normal. Like it should just be normal what we see, and we shouldn't have to ever see those kind of reactions, you know, back on Twitter. So I feel like, you know, we need to also open our blind spots, because, you know, I think we've still got like a long way to go on, you know, faith representation, on age representation, on all sorts of different, looking at different kinds of multi-ethnic representation as well, disability, invisible disability, like, you know, different LGBTQIA plus narratives. You know, there's so much work to be done in terms of representation, like just the whole gamut. And so I think, you know, we just need to keep on making that that this is the way we are, this is who we and how we represent, that we reflect the society that we live in and the society that we want to become as well. So, you know, what are the kind of, what, you know, and just continually pushing out what it means to be human in 2020, and that you know we are humans, and it's about humanity and about representing everybody within our work. So yeah, I think that's the number one thing: representation all the way, every day.
I think that's a really good point, Ali. And you know, just I really enjoyed your comments earlier around the need for more diversity and inclusion across journalism. You know, as a business, I think for us, you know, we're very lucky that we have a very conscious leader in place in our CEO, and he has made it very clear to the organization and to the business that, you know, from a diversity and inclusion point of view, you know, we need to do more as an organization ourselves. So we have recently set up a diversity board, which is led by our female deputy editor, Charlotte Ross. You know, we've had I'm very happy to say we've had two very prominent female editors in the last couple of years. And most recently, you know, we were delighted to have Emily Sheffield on board. So, you know, I think, you know, the fact that we are addressing gender and ethnic diversity across our workforce is also, again, contributing to our commitment to being as authentic as we can within, you know, those wider topics that we're talking to London about every single day. And I think if we could see more conscious leadership in organizations coming through, I think the benefits of that will not just be for today, but will also kind of massively contribute to, you know, creating more sustainable businesses of the future as well.
Yeah, I think, you know, when we're talking about this too in a corporate context, I think Will has brought this up earlier. You know, this has to be kind of embedded in the organization. D&I can't just be kind of a standalone thing. CSR can't be a standalone thing. Like when you're trying to create that values-based organization, your performance metrics and things like that need to be embedded. You can't curate a CSR initiative or a diversity and inclusion initiative. It has to be embedded and it has to be operationalized, right? And I think that's what, you know, companies are making progress on, but there's still a way to go. And nobody wants the fake stuff. Right now, in the age of social media, people can blow right through anything that's not authentic really quickly and see if you're faking or not.
I think, yeah, like what's quite concerning, I think, from my point of view as well, is how when, you know, a lot of people and organizations are trying to like overhaul their D&I, I feel like a lot of the time people see it as, so for example, with like race related issues, people see it as a problem that people from minority backgrounds need to fix, when actually it's not really our problem. We're cleaning up the white majority's mess. And so I think, and I get that, I guess, I don't think it comes from a lack of caring, but maybe it comes in a fear of like not wanting to get involved and do or say the wrong thing. But actually more than ever, we do, like, while yes, our lived experience is more important and valid in these kind of discussions, we need the support of of white allies to actually drive this agenda forward, especially because they hold loads of positions of most of the positions of power. And something that I definitely notice is, like, I think people in their head will think lots of things, and allies will think lots of things, but they ultimately don't see it as their problem to fix. And I think that really does need to change. And this doesn't go to race-related issues. It's, you know, for all the different diversity pillars. I'm just speaking from like my personal experience, but yeah, I think that's something that's really, really crucial, and that I think often will result in a lot of conversations that are happening in isolation within organizations where you know, I'm talking with a group of people who will already understand what I'm talking about, but I'm not talking with people who don't understand it and who need to, like, actually learn more about it.
I think if there's anything that perhaps isn't working as well, at least from what I've seen across different parts of the industry, actually, I think it's just a strategy. Understanding that this isn't while it's a signal event or a flashpoint moment, it's not a flash in the pan, right? I feel like a lot of the reactions right now are for right now. And there is no consideration of what this looks like in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time, or that we've actually hit a turning point, you know. And I think so the way that I look at it is, you know, the UN's population development group projects that by 2050, 2.5 billion people on Earth will be African. Right, and that represents a quarter of the world's population at that point in time, for projection-wise, right? So I'm like, well, if that's going to be the case, right, and seeing what the distribution is between men and women within Africa, right, you have, and that's bearing in mind that of that 25%, a significant chunk are under 25, right? So it's not like sort of the elderly aspect of things. If you look at the rate of growth in which you have, where you've got, you know, sub-Saharan African growing at, you know, approximately 3% a year, right, which is twice as fast as South Asia. When you look at that kind of projection, you have to have a plan if you want to be a profitable business, right, in 20, 30 years' time, of how you're going to service those people, meet those needs, leverage that workforce. And I think that this kind of moment, the seminal moment, is a chance for us to be able to look at that properly, formulate a strategy, and then work our way backwards from, if I am successful and I have a business that's running in 2050, and I am delivering these particular services and goods to the population at that time, what do I need to do now to position me for that? You know, I love the fact that Deborah's obviously talked about the heritage and the rich history of the ESI, right? It shows always being a forward-thinking approach in terms of decades and possibly centuries, right? You know, but the point is that you're thinking long-term, and I feel that that's the part that's missing right now. There's a strategy for this year, there's a strategy for the next 2 years. I don't know if there's a strategy for the next 5, 10, or 50 years.
Sorry, can I just add to that as well? I think that UN point about the UN and prediction is really interesting, because we always use the language of ethnic minority, but with global companies, actually, we're not, you know, a lot of races aren't ethnic minorities, they're global majorities. And so maybe we just need to change the language that we're using as well. When we're talking about stuff like this.
Fantastic. I feel like I feel like if we all implement these points, and that we will have a much better business environment as we go forward. And the point about having a plan for the next 30, 50 years is so important. I'm afraid that we are running out of time, and I just wanted to thank everybody for such fantastic discussion, for sharing with us so candidly and so insightfully. And I'd just like to thank everyone who's joined us today for this AOP Crunch session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Very much.
Bye.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a great discussion, and really delighted to have you all here. So thank you all very much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks all. Bye.